Is it better to write villains or antagonists? Screenwriting 101, Part 2. Hello. Aloha, young filmmakers, young screenwriters. Welcome to my mini lessons podcast for action movies, storytelling through action, my new podcast on my YouTube channel. I'm making this podcast as a resource for young filmmakers. I want to give you what I feel is the correct guidance and how to approach your art. And this week's episode is about the Dark Knight trilogy, where I'm talking about how action defines the character of our villains. And so in my previous mini lesson, I'm talking specifically about the Dark Knight and how Harvey Dent is an antagonist. He's a hero, but he's also an antagonist for the first half of that story, and he becomes a villain. This one, these mini lessons I feel are a bit more special and a bit more practical because the goal here, I'm really finally addressing more directly how you should be approaching your filmmaking. And I'm not making any promises here. I'm not going to promise you that if you take my advice that you're going to become a Hollywood professional or anything. I just want to help you be a stronger artist, which in turn should help you do all those things. But this is just my advice from someone who's been doing it for a while. So Screenwriting 101, is it better to write villains or antagonists? And to that I say it's all about the story you're trying to tell and what role the characters play against each other. In the case of The Dark Knight, Harvey Dent was an antagonistic character to Commissioner Gordon because they had two different ways of seeing how to fight crime in Gotham. And the sad irony of that movie is that Harvey Dent was right. What Harvey Dent said in the first half of the movie, if Commissioner Gordon had listened to him, then what happened to Harvey Dent would have never happened. So, in the case of this mini lesson, I want to talk about The Dark Knight Rises and how Catwoman is our antagonist and Bane is our villain. Again, Bane, without question, from the beginning of the movie, he's killing CIA people. He's willing to kill his own people in order to complete his mission of inevitably capturing Batman and destroying Gotham. He's a villain. He's got no qualms about it. He knows he's a villain. He acts like a villain. Everything he does is villain stuff. But in the case of Catwoman, she falls into that interesting realm of anti-hero because when we're introduced to her, she's stealing from Bruce Wayne's safe. There's a whole other plot line involving her stealing Bruce Wayne's fingerprints and what's it called? Corporate espionage. She's involved in all these different things. So in this case, technically she begins as an antagonist, and across the movie, as she gets to know both Bruce Wayne and Batman, across the movie, she becomes a hero. By the end of the movie, she's a blatant hero when she's helping out Batman save the city. But she has this whole middle ground where she starts in the beginning, where she's not a villain. She's not trying to hurt Bruce Wayne directly, but she's stealing in order to benefit herself, make some money, and it ends up getting her tied up very deeply with Bane and that circle of villains. And for those reasons, she's doing things that hurt Batman, including leading him into a trap when Batman's searching for Bane and realizes she's his most direct pathway to getting to Bane. She helps lead him into a trap that leads us to the amazing, scary, sad fight where Bane fights Batman in that underground layer and ultimately beats Batman, beats him to a pulp, cracks his back, breaks his mask off, and then we find out that this underground structure that they're in is actually directly underneath Wayne Tower, where he has blown it all. He blows up the roof, and one of the Batmobiles falls down. So, in every sense of the word, Catwoman is working against Batman, but she's not a villain. So then she's an antagonist, right? So, but it's her journey in seeing this specific betrayal is the turning point for her character, where, she was not a good person before. Not necessarily, but because she betrays Batman and ultimately realizes it's also Bruce Wayne, who now she realizes, oh, I've misjudged you. Because the whole first half of the movie, every time she meets Bruce Wayne, because she stole his mother's necklace, every time she meets him, they are having, again, an antagonistic relationship where he's trying to get to know her and relate to her, and also admits to her, hey, my mother's necklace looks much better on you than in that safe. So he's subtly flirting, but she's constantly judging him with, you're rich and you could never know what it's like to be me, and you suck, and I've stolen your car, goodbye. You know what I mean? So even though she kisses him in that same dance scene where she's wearing a mask and he's not, their relationship is antagonistic. It's romantic, but like a good James Bond romance, it's that girl that you keep pursuing. That's the one you really want. So he keeps trying to meet up with her and have these little flirtatious interactions, but she just keeps putting him down and reminding him that he's too well off to understand what it's like to suffer. And so that's their relationship. So she's an antagonist to him, but that doesn't mean that she isn't a complete character who goes through a character arc, right? So for ye young screenwriters, I think, especially with The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, these are two great examples where you can watch a character start out one way and then they go from one character archetype to the other. Harvey Dent goes from the White Knight, who over the course of the movie is pushed into being a villain, but he does have an antagonist relationship with Commissioner Gordon, right? But it's all about how he goes from one side of that definition to the other. So stories are about character, they're about transformation. To simply say I write antagonists and I don't write villains, well, that doesn't really say anything about yourself as a storyteller. And I just remember seeing a lot of that when I was coming up, learning how to do all this stuff as a young person, and also knowing that it was wrong. I knew that it was wrong, and when I would say these things to my fellow creative peers at the time, they would just brush me off because my teacher said it's better to write an antagonist and not a villain. But actually, I made this short film with an excellent actor, Stephen Chang, and a friend at the time. It's called Day 442. It's on my YouTube channel, Day 442. Sorry, I know I slur sometimes. But in that short, which is, it's a bit slow, and I'll tell you the truth, men relate to it more than women. But it's a short film about a guy who seems to be in limbo. He's trapped in a bar. When he runs out the door, he comes back inside the bar. He can't ever escape. And the whole movie, he's having flashbacks of the last thing he did before he died, which was coincidentally in that bar. But he's slowly, over the course of the movie, realizing that he's his own villain, that he put himself in this situation. Because over the flashbacks, you realize he was a good man who became corrupt, and it's that corruption that gets him killed. So he's the villain of his own story, even though in present time limbo, he's the hero wondering, how did this happen to me? So there's a very complicated nature to who's a villain and who's a hero and who's your antagonist and what that all means. It's all about the story you're trying to tell and where you want these characters to go. And when it comes to The Dark Knight Rises, Catwoman is a sort of a villain, more of an antagonist than villain, who becomes a hero by story's end. So just because you have an archetype of hero, villain, antagonist doesn't mean that can't change over the course of the story. It's about what is your story about on a personal and thematic level that gets your character from one side to the other.